You and I have waited for this for a really long time, and I am so proud to say it is finally here. Ask a Matchmaker. Matchmaker Maria's no-nonsense guide to finding love. You can find it at your local bookstore, or you can download it on your favorite audiobook app. I'll read it to you. Let's go. Welcome to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. I'm your host, Matchmaker Maria, and today is May 20th, 2025. Today is Pub Day. Ask a Matchmaker. Matchmaker Maria's no-nonsense guide to finding love is out in stores at your local bookstore or whatever app you listen to audiobooks out. It's out, babes, and I can't wait for you to read it or hear it. However you consume books, it's out there. Matchmaker Crystal is joining me this month. I am so happy that my sister is here, not only because you're in this book, but because you're also a professional matchmaker. I'm talking about our family history here. Welcome to the pod again.
I am so excited to be here today for the release of your book and for this podcast episode, and to be able to co-host this with you and be the one who asks you questions.
You're actually going to ask a matchmaker.
I am going to ask the matchmaker today. So that's really exciting for me.
I love that.
Let's get started, Maria. As somebody who saw the stress and excitement in you writing this book for a while, what was the process of writing the book? What was it like for you?
After it got picked up by my wonderful, wonderful publisher, St. Martin's Essential, I got to work, but it took a really long time. It took a lot longer than I thought it would, mainly because I kept getting stuck. And right. I discovered in my process that if I went to church, this sounds weird, but if I went to church, my brain would clear to sort out certain chapters.
Yeah, church does that to you sometimes. It's the smells, it's the hymns. When I would go, like my mind would completely clear and you kind of get into this meditative state. And I actually was able to witness that over the summer last year. Remember, you're like, take these kids. And I had the 4 kids at home, and you would go to church and then you would come back and you're like, okay, 5 ideas just came up and I know how to write it now. What were the hardest chapters to write?
So yeah, final manuscript was due at the end of last summer. And I want to go back to why that's an important date later. But in August, I knew that chapter 2 and 3 needed to be rewritten. So like the whole book is written here now. But my editor's like, something's off here.
Right.
And her advice was always really good. It's like, push it forward. Like, you don't need to give them the whole history lesson, just push it forward. And there's so much I want to share. And because this book has been written in a very conversational style with the reader or with the listener, depending on how you consume this book, it's like, I'm excited. I just want to tell you all these things, but I also need to make sure it's being pushed forward. Like, we're getting to the goal, which is your guide to finding love or keeping love, you know? So I remember in August, actually getting so frustrated that I would delete those 2 chapters, like just Control A, select all, delete. And I'm like, I'm just going to start from scratch again.
Well, what are those, like, what are those 2 chapters? Like, what do they cover, and why was it so hard?
Right. So actually, I'm gonna tell you first about chapter 1. Because then chapter 2 and 3 will make more sense.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really important in anyone reading this book to understand like how we got here, right? Why is it hard for a lot of people to find love or keep the love that they want? And it is because dating is rather new. So chapter 1, in a very conversationalist way, I'm kind of walking you through the history of dating, but the history of dating through our environment, through pop culture. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not enough to just say, well, Match.com was created, this year. It's way beyond that, right? And dating is relatively new in the course of human history. Dating is 130 years old. And the only reason it began in the States, dating is only 130 years old in the States. In other countries, it's way less than that. And one of the countries that I, of course, reference because I feel like I have 2 feet in both ponds is Greece, right? So dating in the States kicks off with the invention of the bicycle. That's all it is, right? Women got access, the women who could afford a bicycle had access to travel and to meet new people, kicking off dating, and then pop culture would follow, right? A lot of things started because of the bicycle, right? The woman's pursuit of equal rights, a woman's pursuit of, getting an education and access to their finances. It all starts off with the bicycle. So the bicycle, foreshadowed the equal wheels, I suppose. Like they foreshadowed what could happen in the future. But beyond that, a lot of other things happened, right? In the 1960s, I talk more about how we start to see now the dating game or, movies, beach party movies, that's what they're called, that would tell people, hey, this is how you meet people. And one thing I didn't include in the book is how, I do mention, how society restructured itself in World War II, after World War II. But one of the things I did not mention in the book is that, post-World War II, the people who had TVs would also gain access to these, black and white PSAs that were made by communities to teach men who no longer had fathers at home how to date, how to ask out a woman, how to pay, how to order food, So it's a very interesting history that we have in American dating. And then I compare that to Greek dating. And that's not in chapter 1. So I have this history of the United States, but then in chapter 2, I start talking about my own matchmaking heritage. And then this is where I go into Greek matchmaking and what that world looks like. I also talk about in chapter 2, I can't talk about matchmaking without talking about compatibility, right? And the starts of it, right? Which is personality typing. And because I'm talking about my heritage, our heritage, because we're both, we're sisters. We have the same grandmother, if you didn't know. I talk about how our grandmother, how she would use personality typing to make sure that the right people were paired together. Right. And for me, the modern foundation of that is Helen Fisher's inventory system, which is very popular personality typing that a lot of professional matchmakers and even dating sites use as a foundation. Right. And it's very similar. Our grandmother would say, or Yaya, as I call her in the book, would say, oh, that person's a Zeus, that person's an Athena, that person's a Poseidon, that person's an Artemis. Like these words meant something. And, 100 years later, well, not even 100 years later, let's say like 70 years later, I have Helen Fisher, who's Dr. Helen Fisher, who I consider, someone like a mentor to me, whose work as a cultural anthropologist was able to uncover our temperaments and how that affects our compatibility and romance, but also how we communicate the things that make us who we are from a nature perspective, not a nurture perspective. Right. And that was that chapter was really hard to write because I just went through a history of like, okay, here's Greek matchmaking, here's what my grandmother did, and here's what we're doing, right? Like I had
a dichotomy, and it's like it's kind of trying to like merge a little bit of different ideas. And there's also a historical aspect to it. You obviously had to do some research, right, to show, XYZ. But I think the beauty of the book is that it's in layman's terms, almost like it.
What? It's in a conversational style.
That's what I'm trying to say. Is that it's not trying to read a scientific book or historical book, and it gets kind of confusing. The thing I love about it is that it's like, oh my God, it's like you're privy to the gossip of the gods almost, especially in the beginning. Right. And I think it kind of gives into that. It's such a great opener because you're like, well, hold on, what does this mean? And then it goes into all these different these historical aspects.
But also it goes back to modern. So in chapter 2, I also talk about what it's like to be a modern day matchmaker. Mm-hmm. And I do mention, like, for instance, what my grandmother did and what we do. I'm sorry, that was weird. What our grandmother did. And what
are we sisters or not?
But what our grandmother did and what we do is like two really different things, right? If you think about Yaya, she matched people post World Wars, post famines, post Civil Wars, right? She matched people during a time where some people had no food to eat, right? They're just trying to create an economy by marrying the right person.
Their trauma was real, and then the trauma that we deal with is like, it's deep.
It's deep, but it's different. But what I want to get back to is like, she was also setting up people not during a really tough time, but also people that shared in the same race, shared in the same religion, probably came from the same community, where families knew the other families, like they knew of the suitor. Right. What we do is nothing like that. First of all, we're getting paid up front. So immediately the wish list and the reality check need to meet very quickly. Right. And there was no wish list back then.
Yeah, we don't know where we don't know what the house that our client looks like. Like, we don't know where he lives or what that looks like.
I don't know what his parents are like.
Where his mom. Yeah, we don't know any of that.
I don't know any of that stuff. And then I also know that my client is like, well, I want to date this race and I want to date this religion. And sometimes that race and religion is not the same that they share. Right. So, and that's okay. But what I'm saying is, like, it's just, I say this in the book, like, I don't think my grandmother ever had to wonder, how many types of Jewish someone could be.
Right. Because when you're in a monolith,
homogeneous
society, everybody's the same. And especially then, people were kind of the same type, like the same level of religiosity. And people
just making up words today.
Well, that's what I mean. Everybody was kind of going, people went to church. They did this. It was all kind of understood. Like, this is what we do here.
And don't forget, this is all happening before the information age. So the fact of the matter is that if you look at history and like how it opens up, up until the invention of the cotton gin, right? Everything is, for 2,000 years, or maybe a few thousand years, like relatively the same. And then you have the cotton gin, or like the being able to write language in press and all that stuff. And now you have this 200 years where things are the same. I can venture to guess, taking away wars and famines, that our grandmother's life, because she existed before the information age, right? She passed away before the internet. Right. Her life was very similar to her mother's life, which was very similar to her grandmother's life, which was very similar to her mother's life. Like, there are 200 years of people dating, meeting the same way.
Right.
And then with the information age, it's a very different world we live in. We don't even meet people in community centers or barbecues. A lot of people, most relationships in the last year have met online, which is fine. I make a case for online dating as well in the book. But I have to point out the difference. And I do point out the difference of how dating started in Greece. So, like, one of the things that I mentioned in the book is that my in-laws and my parents, despite meeting only 5 years apart, met in two different periods, like two different eras, right?
Right.
So my in-laws, they met in the 70s. In the 70s, it was parental matchmaking at work. And then in 1981, you have all of these governmental reforms to make women equal to men. Right? Mm-hmm. The banning of the dowry, the women not taking men's last names, women having equal pay to men, women's access to contraception, all these, just this equal rights campaign that happened in 1981, and how that fundamentally changed dating as they know it, right? Which, matchmaking then moves on from, your parents and the local matchmaker, our grandmother, for instance, mm-hmm. to the best friend.
Right.
And that's how that's how my parents met.
I don't know where I'm from anymore. I don't know where I come from.
You were adopted. We got you for a sack of potatoes. I've told you this your whole life. Our parents, they met through a friend at a friend's party. And I also talk about that. And so that was chapter 2. And that was really hard. And then chapter 3 was hard because I then talk about what I see as a really big obstacle right now, which is that people feel like they're too different to make it work. And that difference is in politics. But mm-hmm. It's not just politics, it's the environment, it's the silos, the media that we consume. So it goes way beyond, like, the chapter is not about like the case of dating someone that votes like you. It's the case for like dating with your values in mind that sometimes can dictate how you vote, but that's not always the case. I can certainly tell you there's plenty of men that might share in how you vote that are terrible people.
Yeah, they don't treat you right. Your values aren't aligned. Your lifestyle is not aligned.
Right.
You don't get along. You're just not compatible.
Right.
But you vote the same, so cool.
So those two chapters were hard for really different reasons because, I wanted chapter 3 when it's like, are we too different to make it work? I wanted to make the case for like, you might be, and that's okay. You don't have to make it work with everybody.
Right.
But also, you might not be as different as you think you are. And I didn't want the book to pander to anybody. Mm-hmm. I was very intentional about like, it's okay to know what your values and morals are, but also be able to look at someone else and say like, well, here's what I admire about this person, even if we don't vote the same.
Right.
So
right.
there's a sort of like mutual respect.
It's a self-reflection in some way, kind of just understanding yourself a little bit more and how that applies to how you became a matchmaker.
Yeah.
And then why you're such a good matchmaker.
Thank you.
And I think the context, because when you are, it helps, I think, in a way, because we are two different people at the same time, not you and I, but just this idea of like, I'm Greek and I'm an American.
Yeah.
And that, what you mentioned earlier, it puts so many things into perspective so often.
And, you know, throughout the book, I do use a lot of not only professional anecdotes, but personal stories as well to illustrate my point.
What was one of your favorite parts of the book?
One of my favorite parts of the book was being able to uncover where this loneliness epidemic stems from, the research behind that. And it's really, you know, I know in the media right now we're either blaming women or blaming men. And I personally blame the systemic environment that we've put ourselves in post-World War II to create these sort of silos, these sort of communities that this is the natural conclusion. We are going to be experiencing loneliness because we never created the community center, right? A lot of community centers in this country were attached to churches, synagogues, and mosques. More people, though, are embracing atheism. Mm-hmm. We have suburban sprawl, right? You don't see this in other countries. Right. But why did that happen in this country? Oh, that's right, because auto companies wanted highways. So that way, like, that created suburban sprawl. You know, I talk about man box culture, and we have this sort of culture that tells men, you know, the worst thing you can be is to seem gay, right? Like, there's no physicalness here. I don't say it like that in the book. I say it in a different way where it's like men are not allowed to cry. Men are not allowed to be vulnerable. Like, they're taught these things at a very young age. And it's a lot of the media that we consume, but it's also how we are structured as a country. And so it made me think a lot about what was I taught as a kid. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, I reference when I moved to Greece when I was 18 to pursue my undergraduate studies.
Right.
And what that did was that, who did I date in Greece? I dated Greek men who had not consumed the same media that I consumed as a kid. Right? I watched Saved by the Bell. I watched Boy Meets World. I watched The Cosby Show, right? I also watched Friends. And what these shows showed me, and let's take Friends away for a second. What did Boy Meets World teach me? Boy Meets World teach me that, well, if a woman gets into an Ivy League school, but she's in a high school relationship, it's okay to not go to that college or university and instead pursue this relationship. What did Saved by the Bell teach me? That Jessie Spano, really smart woman, it's okay to make fun of her for being passionate about information and knowledge, right? The punchline. The same thing with Ross and Friends. Almost every single plot line of Ross in Friends is his friends making fun of his passion and his job. And what is he? He's a paleontologist at one of the top universities in the country, okay?
Right.
And so what does that do to someone when they pursue dating in a different country that has not consumed that sort of media, right? They didn't consume Boy Meets World. And it's, I'm thinking, okay, whoever I date in college, that's the guy. Now, what did those guys that I'm dating watch? Yeah, sure, we certainly export American culture to other countries. Right?
I think they watched a lot of 90210. I remember
they did
that
watch
being
a lot of
like
90210.
Top of mind.
They did watch Saved by the Bell. They do have access to those shows. They watch MacGyver. That's a big one.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that this was Americans. This was American culture.
Yeah.
But when you look at Greek TV, there is no Greek TV show that shows teenagers having relationships.
Right.
Almost every Greek show is either a soap opera, which older people, or workplace comedy, workplace comedy, not drama. So like kind of like The Office, right? Mm-hmm. If there are teenagers involved in any show, you're showing them the real teenage experience where the parent is stressing them the hell out to do good in the exam so they can go to college, right? And there's no room for relationships. So of course, when I'm now in college in Athens, I'm taking every relationship I have super seriously.
Yeah.
But they're like, you know, what are we doing this weekend? You know,
let's see how it goes.
YOLO, whatever.
Yeah,
and it was so interesting to have that experience, to have like certain fights that would happen. Because it's like, well, what do you mean? Topanga told me this.
Yeah.
And I think it was interesting having that eureka moment as I was writing the book, because I did not come into writing the book thinking about this. It's as I was writing about our heritage. It's as I was writing about what professional matchmaking looks like in the United States. It's as I was writing, what does it feel like when I have a client who comes in with the wish list, but I still have to give them the reality check.
Right.
And then it's like, well, where does this all come from? It's also, you know, as the book was being written, the Surgeon General comes out saying we have a loneliness epidemic. And then that's when it's like, oh, wait a second, like, hold on, where did this come from? You know, like,
right,
and that's
trying to look into it. You know, it's interesting you say that about, you know, what kind of media they were consuming and what kind of media you're consuming, because it puts into context, like, if you are living in a different country other than your own, you are more inclined to date another expat.
Right. Like, you mean like an expat would date another expat?
An expat would date another expat. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember being in London just for my graduate degree, and then really just hanging out with other Americans. Mm-hmm. Or Greeks. Again, I was living a double life. Like, I was like two different people.
Right.
But I did not hang out with any actual British students.
Right.
And
why is that?
I didn't feel, I mean, if I could go back, I would not do that. But initially at that time, I was like, I can't relate to you. Yeah. I can relate to the American who's having the same cultural experience as I am right now. We've had our stuff. And now we're in England. It's similar. They understand me. I understand them, but it's a little different, and I don't know. And then I would be with the Greek kids from Greece, because I was like, yeah, I understand you a little bit, and we're kind of having this experience here too. So, and I think I feel like a lot of that is also within the dating sphere. You know, if you go to a different country and you start to live there, you might be more inclined to date within your expat community, because it's familiar.
Just generally speaking, I know we've never used this as a parameter, but passport holders can only date other passport holders.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't. Certainly, it happens. You go to another country, you meet a French man, and then you date. And you marry.
But maybe that person has also been to another country.
Right.
I mean, honestly, in France, they're right next to like 15 different countries. They can easily travel.
You understand my context. I
do understand
here,
what you're saying.
But I guess to your point here, I want to ask, who is this book for?
Right.
Who would you say is your audience?
Right. So obviously single people, because this book is being marketed to single people. Yeah. But because, you know, it says here, Matchmaker Maria's no nonsense guide to finding love. It's right on the cover, right? But this is written as a prescriptive memoir, mm-hmm. not just a dating book. It's written in a very conversationalist style. So it feels like you and I are out for coffee. I remember as I was writing it thinking, I want this to be the book also for people in relationships, because we still, even in some of our programs, like our coaching programs, we still attract people that are in relationships who are like, can you just tell me more about how to be compatible? Or how do I date my spouse? Or how do I date my girlfriend or my boyfriend? Yeah. And I think that understanding how you started dating this person and how to keep dating them and how to date well, how to give more positive bids in your relationship, I think this book is for everyone.
I mean, you know,
just like the podcast.
The podcast is for everybody. The book is for everybody too, because, you know, Maria and I do coaching every single month with groups of women every single month.
And men.
And men, of course. And we've been doing this for so many years. And then every month we have our own little aha moments, or we figure out within a year, like, oh, I have a new trigger. And once I'm able to identify my own stuff, I can better communicate that to my partner. Like there's less arguments because I can say, hey, this is bothering me or this is negatively impacting me. And then they're hyper aware of us, I think, our partners, and they see what we do for a living. So now they're trying to work on their selves. And there's like, if she can identify this trigger and communicate it to me, then I should allow myself to be more vulnerable and do that as well. And so
I also think I don't know if you've experienced this, but I will admit that I have experienced this where you date someone, you break up with them, but the history of that is so traumatic or so frustrating that you hold on to it somewhere in your body, you know, and in your, you know, maybe in your mind or your soul, and you could meet someone else, you could fall in love, you could get married, and you could have kids, and you still have yet to heal from that.
Right.
And I'm not saying that my book has some magic formula for healing. I'm not saying that. But what I will say is that it will certainly deepen your perspective as to why it didn't work with that last person.
Yes.
And understanding and having that perspective, it does make it a lot easier to move on.
Right.
And I felt like, you know, I've held on to one or two ex-boyfriends, you know, let's say on a soul level of like, oh, I'm still disappointed that I let that person do this to me. I'm still so frustrated. You know, I don't hate them. I'm indifferent because I feel like hate is really, it's a feeling that is kind of similar to love. I don't have any hate, but I have a lot of indifference. That doesn't mean that I can't look at my past and been like, coulda, woulda, shoulda, right?
Right.
But then as I'm writing this book, I'm like, why am I so hard on myself at the things that I did when I was 21?
Oh my God, you really, I think it's like those thoughts that you have where you're like, why did I say that in 8th grade?
Right.
But it's so true. Like, and I think it's a part of it is like, you know what it is being older and maybe a little bit wiser, but seeing yourself then saying, I wish I had the mind that I have now then,
right,
to not have allowed this behavior to affect me and to not have allowed them to treat me this way.
I mean, I held on to something traumatic that happened when I was 25 for like 10 years. By 35, I had 2 kids.
Right.
But it was so upsetting to me that I just held on to it. And it was only until I started writing this book and then rereading it to myself where I was like, oh my God. Like I actually coached myself like, oh, this is why it didn't work.
Right.
This is why I am in a better place. And I honest to God, I haven't thought about this person since last August.
I mean, except for this very moment.
Well, except for this very moment. And I think that's like, I feel like when you asked me before about like, who is this for? I do feel like it is for everyone.
It is for everyone. For our women listeners, I do want to say that I have a really good feeling, and I know that men will also be picking up this book.
Oh, there's so many men that have already purchased
And the reason I say that is because every time that Maria and I are speaking to a client or have done coaching with men and we say the typical book we always tell them to read is like Attached.
Right.
And they actually do the work, they do the homework and they read it. If they read it 100% of the time, they will message us back and say,
wow,
I found out so much about myself.
I actually mentioned this in the book, by the way.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. So like, I found out so much about myself. I've been doing so many things wrong, and like this has opened up my eyes. And in a way, you know, I think this is the way the book is written. It's not this woo woo kind of perspective that other
it's also
books
not
have.
Fully, you know, I also didn't want my book. Look, I get dating books all the time as a professional in the industry.
Right, yeah.
And I can't read half of them because they all resemble academic textbooks. I didn't want that. I was like, I want this to be the dating book that has a lot of storytelling so that you actually start it and finish it.
This is, you know what it is? It's like I've seen it in action, and it happens to me too. It's like when we meet people and they say, oh, you're a matchmaker, and they're so fascinated by what we do. And then and then you kind of start working at that moment for whatever reason. But it's not like I'm not mad about it. I truly, we want to like talk to people and help people. And now this initial starter conversation has become like a 3-hour conversation. And that's kind of what this book does. It is a conversation that you would have otherwise had on a one-on-one with Maria.
Right.
So I think, or me. And so I think that's why, obviously I love the book because it's your book, but I think that's another reason why you should read the book, because it is different from, I think it is very different from other
dating books.
Because it is an ongoing conversation.
Rather and the conversation doesn't end. I already have ideas for the next books.
Well, I have one last question, Maria. Can you please tell me about this awesome book cover? I remember when we were talking about it, and I was like, oh, let me give you some example. Like, I wanted to be part of this process, even though it's not my job. So I was like, let me get to Canva, but that's not my job. So tell me more about the book cover.
Did you send me ideas?
I did. I was like, how about these? I was like, it's your book, but it's our book.
Right. I didn't design the cover. It's funny. I gave a lot of ideas. I mean, I think you did too. My memory's gone now, but I was trying to describe, originally they had sent me a cover with like Venus de Milo on the cover.
Yes, I was there.
Yeah. And I was like, this isn't it. And then I sent I think an audio note to the person that was designing the book at St. Martin's. And I said, look, this book is called Matchmaker Maria's No Nonsense Guide to Finding Love. And if I were talking about this with someone, it would be at a cafe and I would be crinkling up a napkin, as I'm talking, and like we're in a rush. And also, I talk about green theory and lilac theory. That's another theory in the book. And I think that this book needs to be greens and purples, and I will allot you just a single heart. And I was very specific. And so essentially what you're seeing on the cover of this book is, in my view, is the napkins at a cocktail bar that are maybe green or purple, and they're rushing, like the movement of what a date is. And the movement of a date is not supposed to be stagnant. It's purpose of a first date is to go on a second.
Right.
And I want that movement to kind of convey, like, look, this is no nonsense. We're going. We're moving on, and I really wanted it to be a very approachable book. I'm really happy it went straight to paperback because I wanted to be really accessible. That was another thing.
This is a perfect book to put in your tote bag to the beach. This is a perfect book to just walk around like this the whole day.
Well, what's funny about this book too is I have the best listeners and the best followers, and we have a DC event on June 17th. And let me tell you, these DC girls, they're organized. They're all wearing green to that event. I'm assuming the same with my New York City girls at the 92nd Y next week on May 28th. They're organized, and I feel like if someone was carrying this in public, there are Matchmaker Maria fans out there, and they're like, oh, Matchmaker Maria, like, oh,
exactly.
They do that all the time. So I feel like this is a book you could take out in public too. It's like fun. And, last but not least, I think this ultimately, what I really want is better dating experiences. So if you were to ask me now what I think about when I go to church, one of the things that I pray about is like, I hope my book is a success, because I really do want the dating experience to change. I really do want people to find clarity and confidence and feel empowered upon reading this. And that's all I care about. So,
take me to church.
I'm taking you to church here. This is the gospel.
Amen. Well, Maria, I can't wait to today when we go home to wheel Mom into the bookstore and have her purchase your book. I mean, she's already pre-ordered, but she's going to go buy it. Like a copy, because she's going to meet and Baba, and I think they're going to be they're already super proud, but we're all very, very proud of you. And Can't wait for this to be translated into several languages. And then
you're
it's
like
a
way
world
ahead
tour.
of me right now.
What tour? The world tour.
The world tour. You're way ahead of me. I'm excited to take mom and dad to the bookstore and for them to get their copy. I'm also excited about my kids. You know, today's also my daughter's 5th birthday.
Happy birthday.
So that's how we're celebrating it. Off to the bookstore. And I just want to say really quick for those that are listening, if you have yet to pre-order the book, I sincerely hope that you do order it this week. You know, I have not been quiet and shy to tell you that I really do want this to get on a bestseller list. And the only way to do that is to get books purchased the first week. That's it. It's the first week. That's how they decide to make those lists. So your support would mean the world to me. You can always support your local bookstore. You can always go to the big bookstores as well. And you can also get this as an audiobook. I would get both, audiobook and the bookstore. So that way,
why don't you read it with Maria actually reading it? You know, have it in.
I feel like this is a good pairing. You know, so
Yes.
I'm excited, and I just want to really quick just thank everyone who's listening and watching this right now. Like, thank you so much for your support. I can feel it. I appreciate you, and I'm so excited for the journey that's about to happen, not only with the book, but with you. So with that said, as I end the book, be lovable, but of course be likable. But I also end the book with a new phrase, harika poli. And that'll make way more sense when you read or listen to this book.